Welcome, everybody. We will get started in just a couple minutes as we give people a chance to filter in from the waiting room here.
I feel like we need some fun spring music for all of you as you're transitioning. The birds are out, the sun is shining. I'm happy woman. Hopefully it is where you are too.
Okay, it looks like we got a pretty good group here. I think we'll get started. Welcome, everybody. We have a great webinar here for you this morning or this afternoon, depending on what time zone you're in. We have our president, Bethany Quinn at Golden Shovel Agency, and along with Hugh McDonald. He was appointed Secretary of Commerce of Arkansas in 2023. He previously served as President and Chief Executive Officer of Entergy Arkansas, the state's largest utility, from 2000 until his retirement in 2016. He also has held a number of other leadership positions with Entergy across Louisiana, Mississippi, Texas, and Arkansas. Joe Miller is in his fourth year as Director of Communications of the Minnesota Rural Electric Association. Prior to that, he worked 30 years in communications and marketing at two distribution electric cooperatives. He and his team manage communications for the statewide association, seeking to tell the story about electric cooperatives to the media and other audiences. We have looking forward to a great conversation with everybody here. If anybody has questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. We will address as many as we can as time allows at the end of this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan, and thank you everyone for being here. I am so excited today to be joined by two individuals who have such extensive experience when it comes to the wide variety of everything that goes into energy, the thing that we don't think about until we absolutely need it. So I'm really excited for our guests today. And before we get going, I just want to remind everyone who Golden Shovel is. So if you're not a current client of ours, you may not know. And we are a full service economic development, strategy, and communication firm. So we have over 400 clients across the United States, and we do award-winning work that helps our clients to ultimately achieve their goals of attracting businesses, creating jobs, supporting their existing business community, and the people who call their communities home. Obviously, energy has become a major component of that. And we've been hearing from a lot of our clients that there are tensions in regards to infrastructure availability and how do we determine who gets it? How do we make sure we have enough? And also, how do we communicate with our stakeholders and residents about these really important and pressing issues? So we are going to be talking about all of that today. And again, we have some great guest speakers for you who have fantastic insights. But, when we look at the overall situation that we're in today, we are producing a lot of energy. We are producing record-breaking amounts of energy in 2025. And we know all over the country, each state is tackling this differently with a combination of traditional sources and renewables. But I mean, I'll say that we've obviously clearly had significant growth and investment being done, but the demands are so high that it's still not enough, right? So we need to figure out what we're going to do next. And of course, there's issues with costs going up that we also have to be concerned about. And I know for a lot of you, that's where this tension's coming from, is from the end user, the people who live in your community, maybe having concerns about what their bills look like. And our guests add some insight to all of that today. But that is where we're at. And a lot of it is coming from this increased demand on the data center size. With data centers increasing to the point of tripling in the past decade, and we're expected to double or triple again, those energy needs are going to continue to grow. Energy, and of course, also there's water concerns and site availability. And so there's a lot of tensions that are happening right now with the ongoing increased need for data centers, which do obviously create some benefits for our communities. All of us know the importance of being connected and being able to ensure that businesses and residents have access to everything that they need online. But the risks come with the fact that data centers take energy away from some of our more traditional businesses like manufacturing, and even away from our ability to develop homes if we're not addressing energy in a strategic way. So for our first, conversation about that, I'd really like to bring you in, Hugh, to talk about what you're seeing in Arkansas, because you're in a really unique position, I believe, as a state to have major wins on the data center side and also on the manufacturing side.
Well, thank you, Bethany. It's good to be with you, and enjoy that. We'll certainly appreciate the discussion today. something I've lived in this space for pretty much my entire career. Um, we are in Arkansas. We've got a pretty diverse economy. We have Walmart, Fortune 1 in the northwest part of the state, but we also have a county in Arkansas on the northeast side of the state that produces more steel than any other county in the country.
Mhm.
We have a growing lithium uh, uh, exploration industry. Hopefully, that will grow into a refining and build out the midstream part of that industry over the long term. But also have aerospace defense and so the onset of data centers. This we as a state are not actually recruiting that industry sector. They are coming here because number one, the business climate. Of course, they're going everywhere, frankly. But they do like the power rates here that are much lower than the national average. I think our industrial rates are probably the fourth or fifth lowest in the country. So they look at that. They also look at available land, available transmission, available water, and so they're coming. And these are large loads, hyperscalers. Anywhere from total of 1,000 megawatts, 1 gigawatt each. So very large projects, and for the utilities, it's a real challenge, no matter what state you're in, to be able to plan for, and you actually can't plan for the phone call that you might get next week of a data center that's talking about a gigawatt of power. That throws your plans off completely, and so the availability of power has become the number one issue, certainly with large load, whether it's manufacturing or data centers. So if you don't have a plan or a way that you can demonstrate to the customer how I'm going to get your power, and a level of certainty in their window, you're not going to get the project.
So I do want to reflect on something you said, and that's that you can't necessarily even plan for those phone calls because the power demand is so high. And just to remind everyone, Hugh was the president and CEO of Entergy. So you do have significant experience in developing long-term plans for energy growth. And I guess what encouragement would you maybe give to leaders who are in that situation of I can't plan for this. What do I do?
Yeah, you've got to have more flexible regulatory mechanisms, which I'll get into later.
Hmm.
That's what we did in Arkansas. You also can't ever, and everybody knows this, not every data center you get a phone call from are legitimate. Everybody wants to be a data center developer these days. So you got to be really, really careful on who's really got the balance sheet and who doesn't. Of course, we all know that the big hyperscalers do. And so yeah, you just have to be manage the risk accordingly, not only for your own balance sheet, but for your customers, all the other customers' balance sheets as well.
And speaking of those, you just queued me up for that perfectly. Speaking of those other customers, manufacturing, right? I mean, this has been bread and butter for economic developers. We need to have these living wage jobs that support the middle class in our communities. American manufacturing has been that historically, and manufacturing still accounts for a large percentage of our energy consumption. I know a lot of the conversations that I have with economic developers is the concern of, if I give a data center this energy and my local business needs to expand, am I going to lose them because it's all tapped up, right? So these are things that we still have to consider because these manufacturing jobs, we need them, and we need to be able to grow those sectors as well, just for our own community resiliency. Now, in Arkansas, I know we've had these conversations, which, you've been in a situation where historically you had a lot of excess capacity so that if a manufacturer did need to expand, it was already there. And now you've had to shift to being more forward looking. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about that, Hugh.
Yeah. I guess if I was going to redraw that red line, I would draw it flat for a while, and then I would have it sort of following the green demand line. That's actually what's happening. Like most investor-owned utilities and not-for-profit utilities, co-ops, we built a lot in the 70s and 80s, and then that building of new capital investment, new generation plants really slowed down because in the 70s, everybody was expecting significant growth. That growth really didn't happen. My entire career was 1 to 2% compounded annual growth rate in kilowatt hour sales. Now we're probably talking 4, 5, 6% or more. And a lot of that is driven by data centers, but some of it is also driven by just much more active onshoring of manufacturing.
Mm-hmm.
What's complicating our challenges in Arkansas, there's 3,200 megawatts of coal plant generation. These plants are really nearing 40 years old. To keep them operating, there's billions of dollars investment that would be required. So there was actually a settlement with the utilities and the EPA a number of years ago, early 20s, I think, where one of those plants is retired in 2028 and the other one is retired in 2030. So number one, we've got, with all this new demand coming, data centers plus manufacturing, we have to replace that 3,200 megawatts, number one, just to stay steady state, then add additional megawatts on top of that to meet the new additional load.
Yeah, I think a lot of states are in that same situation where we have plants that are going out of commission. And obviously the challenge for utilities, as we talked about, and Joe, you're going to get into this from the co-op side next, really managing that growth. I don't know if you want to address anything on this slide, but I know you have a lot to share with us.
Yeah, just really touching on what Hugh said. This kind of it is tangential totally to that conversation that the growth, a lot of the growth in the utility industry is cyclical, right? You talked about in the 70s and stuff. That's when we were building out systems. We've grown into those, and we're actually reaching a point where, some more power supply is needed, and a lot's been being built, inverter based, solar and wind. But what's needed out there as we, whether or not data centers are coming. I mean, it varies from region, utility to utility, but I'll talk about that in a little bit, just the reliability challenges that are out there as well. And so, we're just, the challenge is reducing the risk to a current utility if a big load is coming on, and not to spread costs among those the consumers that are already there. That's really what we're talking about, the variety of challenges for utilities in this mix.
And Bethany, if I could add something on this slide, and I believe I know Joe would agree with me. That picture, you would not find any distribution system that looks like that on Joe's utility or any utility in the country. I think that's somewhere from probably from India or Pakistan. So
yes,
we did throw that in there just to symbolize the chaos, right? but no, we do not believe that is a representation of either of your utilities. So thank you for pointing that out. Chaos it is, though. All right. So Joe, why don't we talk more about the co-op perspective and reliability challenges?
Yeah, as working for the not-for-profit electric cooperatives, certainly the reliability is a huge priority. They're focused on that, as all utility providers are. And and the challenges that electricity provides. A lot of people, and for some, it's like new to them, right? That we don't store energy. We're starting to have some batteries, but in reality, you don't store it for later use. Like you can store oil or fuel or something in a location and have it ready at your disposal. We've got to generate it as it is demanded, and that creates for a very technical system out there. Very complicated, very technical, and we're starting to see more short-term storage. But it's new and expensive, and it's short term. It's 4 hours. So you run some batteries, and in 4 hours they're drained. Those resources are gone now, and in fact have to be refilled at some point. And so there's experimentation going with long-term energy storage. Right here in Minnesota, we've got Great River Energy, one of our power suppliers in the state, is working with Form Energy on longer-term battery storage. We're talking like 100-hour dissipation. So that's great. There's some challenges with it, so they're experimenting with it. Xcel Energy is also working with Form Energy on a project as well to try that. So the difference, where we're shutting down, Hugh talked about it, we're shutting down some plants that are, they're available 24/7. And if you have the fuel for them, they're going to produce power. And that's not true with a lot of what we've replaced with. So we just have these reliability challenges coming at us from a lot of it from policy that's going on, and it does make it challenging. But cooperatives are stepping up to meet these goals and provide the power that's needed.
Yeah, and everyone's doing it differently, but I know you have some insights just nationwide as far as where you think this is looking.
Yeah, this is a graphic provided in the most recent North American Electric Reliability Corporation assessment, long-term assessment of what's going on in the nation. And the nation's divided up into various regions. And so this is an organization, and there's others, FERC and MRO, that are out there to be, watch over the system and see how are we doing reliability wise. They're the ones who sound the alarms if needed, and manage what's going on the grid across the country. And we are starting to see the alarm bells starting to go off. And I've been in this business a long time, and I can tell you we have not. I don't remember seeing as often these reports coming out and saying, just there's either elevated risk or high risk for some reliability issues. And so we've got to pay attention to what these others are saying. In this most recent report that just came out, I mean, some of the lines are in here, but they're talking about the increased, because of the weather dependent resources, they increase the complexity of planning and operating a reliable grid. And they talk about fossil fuel plants being retired. And so those that have fuel on site that are being retired, it impacts the system's ability to respond as we reduce those. And so they're talking about there's less diversity which increases the risk as we have less diversity in the fuel supply. And you'll hear utilities talk about, all resources. They want to have availability to all resources rather than just a pocket of some. Mm-hmm. And even Jim Robb, the president of NERC, this was just like last week, I saw this in Utility Dive. He has said the U.S. grid withstood Winter Storm Fern in January without disruption to the bulk power system. But the electric sector cannot become complacent because reliability risks are rising. So we have to just be aware of these. The policymakers who are doing this, the utilities involved, have to be aware of this, of how we are doing on the supply, looking ahead. And I was going to say that doesn't mean any particular utility, somebody's looking to develop somewhere and say, oh, well, stay out of Minnesota or stay out of Arkansas. They got problems. That's not the message. It is that every utility is responsible for supplying their supply, right? They're going to meet the needs of their consumers, and that's what they're able to do and work at doing. But just to be aware, when we're talking regionally, we've got to be aware of some of the signals that are being sent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's good insight. And it goes down to how do we plan? How do we plan for the future? And these are some of the uncomfortable questions that economic developers are being asked, and would love to hear your guys' insights on this. But people are asking, how should we allocate our power? Should we take in a project that is going to create job, that's going to be an investment, but how do I make sure that's the right project for my community based on power? Do we avoid the first come, first serve, right? Like whoever comes and signs the agreement gets it first. Should we be more strategic? What do you guys think about that?
Well,
It's a tough
I'd
one.
say that's no one project is the same.
Mhm.
No service territory, electric utility state is the same. I don't think you'll find many economic developers, politicians that would say, no, I don't want that project right now that creates jobs.
Mhm.
However, they might say, I'm not interested in that project that is going to create jobs, but is also going to make everybody's electric rates or infrastructure costs go up. And
Sure.
some large industrial manufacturing entities, that happens, and that's where politicians just have to weigh the additional jobs and the spin-off economic development associated with everybody else's rates going up just a little bit more to serve that new customer.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, and we're seeing with some of the large loads like data centers and stuff, some coming in with a lot of money and covering the costs and not passing those costs on. Some are getting creative, and how they're doing things. And I've got the example coming up in here, but yeah, they've maybe got to have some creativity in how they do that, and certainly on the as a representing the not-for-profit cooperatives. The one factor that we have is really not being an investor-owned utility, so that every project that comes online, if we're building infrastructure and stuff, those costs are coming out of the pocket of either the current consumers or the one doing the project. And so trying to balance that and make sure that it is fair, but there are benefits certainly to this growth. So you do have to consider that as well. And as you said, every project's going to be different.
Yeah, for sure. And I will tell you, because of the number of economic developers that I speak with, our team speaks with, that people are turning projects away, not because they want to, but because of the concerns about needing to make sure that they have what they need for housing, for example, which I think we have listed here. When you need to build homes and they need energy too, how do you balance all of it? So one of the things because I know I had conversations with both of you before we got on this webinar, and both of you mentioned early coordination. So I'd love if you could dive into that a little bit more as a way that you can encourage economic developers to be more proactive in participating in that planning.
Yeah, I can jump in on
Go ahead, Joe.
certainly with the utilities, that we represent and stuff. They'll tell you, come early, tell us what's going on, tell us what you need, because there's planning process that has to take place. And especially if we're starting to see, right, more of this kind of development going in rural areas. So you're probably going to be served by an electric cooperative. Most of them that I know of are not vertically integrated like investor-owned utilities. You've got a power supplier around here. We've got like Great River Energy or Basin Electric or Minn Kota or something like that, who's the wholesaler, and then they're selling to the local distribution cooperatives who are hooked up to the end users. So you've got some moving parts in there, and you've got to have conversations and give enough time to have those conversations and talk about supply and how you're going to meet that, and they can work with you on those kinds of things.
Yeah, I would agree with what Joe said there. As a state, and I represent the state in these conversations, having that open door, having that constant communication with your energy suppliers, whether it's gas or electric, in your municipality. We're constantly communicating economic development. Everybody on the phone knows that this it's a team sport. You have to work these projects as a team. You have to coordinate. And the more those lines of communication remain open and discussions continue to happen, the more successful folks are going to be.
Yeah, and I can just say anecdotally, because we do a lot of strategic planning work, the economic developers who, when our team asks them, who are your contacts at your local utility? What are their names? When was the last time you met with them? They're the ones that are having an easier time getting the job done, right? And being able to respond to RFPs and actually support their businesses than ones who don't know. So that communication is very important.
Yeah.
Joe, you're going to let us know a little bit about what's happening in Northern Virginia. I live in this area in the DMV, and yeah, this is a very hot topic over here.
Yeah, yeah, and this actually comes from a presentation that we had somebody from Northern Virginia Electric do for our CEOs in Minnesota, and so I grabbed this slide from it just because it just is amazing the amount of growth out there. Now in Northern Virginia, there's they call that data center alley, as you know, Bethany, I'm sure, and just because the close proximity to the capital out there, lots of defense contractors, lots of infrastructure and data information going on out there, as well as they say that you can see that 70% of global internet traffic flows through Northern Virginia. That's mind-boggling to think about. And so we're seeing a lot of growth out there for data centers. And in fact, this Novak, the electric cooperative out there. So this presentation was given, I believe it was in about mid to a little earlier in 2025. Well, at that time they served 67 data centers, and they had 36 more planned. So phenomenal growth there. And just for size, they serve like 700 square miles out there. I mean, while they're a smaller, dense area, they're very large as far as how many accounts they're serving, almost 200,000 accounts. But they've got 22 substations with 10 under construction at the time that I heard this presentation, and then 15 in engineering and 53 more in planning. I mean, it's just mind-boggling the amount of growth there. And they're projecting that they'll go from data centers consuming 65% of their energy to 95%. So they've got some challenges all their own being that huge, but I thought it's just interesting to show. You can see the names out here, the logos of those who are developing out there, the data centers that are there. And it's just an awareness of how this is coming. Now in the Midwest, we haven't seen all of this. We're starting to hear, I've got a slide coming up, Google and others talking about developing in the area, but Virginia has seen it now for quite a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these logos tell the story. I mean, that's crazy. That's a lot of data centers. And we're gonna pivot a little bit to talk about success stories because for everyone, maybe if you join late or whatnot, Joe has some really great insights into what's happening at the cooperative level and at the state level in Minnesota. Hugh has great insights into what's happening at the state level in Arkansas, and then comes from being the CEO of Entergy. So we're getting a lot of success story perspective here, which I appreciate. And then I really wanted to talk about the first very foundational thing that we recommend you do at Golden Shovel, which is to proactively engage your community, because it doesn't matter if you're trying to attract data centers or a new type of industry, or if you're trying to secure support for a school bond or infrastructure work. You've really got to engage your community. We just talked about Northern Virginia. So I live in Maryland, and there is so much pushback in the DMV for data center projects. I mean, it is in the news every day. There is just a lot of concerns with people who live here and people who have businesses here locally. And I think that's something that we're seeing across the country in different pockets, right? Where people don't understand what's happening on the economic development side. They don't see a clear benefit for them. They feel like maybe their business could get left behind or pushed out, right? Whether it's energy needs or maybe workforce not being available for them, or maybe as a resident, they feel like their rates are going to go up. So this engaging the community is so critical for anyone that's even doing any attraction work, and especially if you're having some massive infrastructure changes. So we really recommend that process include open surveys to collect feedback online. This can be open to any resident. That's so easy. Post it out on social media, collect information and review it regularly so you know what your community cares about. When we come in and do strategic planning, we're hosting town halls and group meetings per industry sector. Having one-on-one BR&E visits is another great way to get data back. Both Joe and Hugh talked about let us know what's going on. If you're doing BR&E visits, asking about their energy needs and asking about their growth plans, and then sharing that information with your utility providers is a great way for you to proactively communicate. And I'll let you guys chime in here, but in my opinion, you can't communicate too much. So if a business has a plan, it might not happen for 18 months, share that anyway.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, basic communication is get the information out there and tell people it enough, because till like you're sick of it, you think, oh, everybody's got to know this project. They don't. Keep
Right.
talking about it and talk about the community benefits and what you're doing to assuage some of those concerns and things.
Yeah.
100% agree.
And some of the ways that we're seeing economic developers successfully communicate after they've done the strategic planning is through their economic development website and a portion for stakeholders. Because obviously, as your economic development website, that's primarily going to be focused on business attraction and business retention initiatives. Very few have a section dedicated to just communicating with the community proactively, and we really recommend that. And you're able to then create and share case studies and success stories, communicate on social media, press releases, news articles, digital ads, and videos. Just really, you have to pull out all the stops because you don't know how all of your community members want to be reached. And some of them may watch a video on YouTube but never read an article. So you have to be proactive in telling your story. I always give this great example of Wyandotte County in Kansas. Greg Kindle, the economic development director there, has done an incredible job of proactively communicating. You can go to their website and you see EcoDevo 101. You can click on it from their menu, go and see case studies, what they're focused on, what their impact has been, and then all the way through social media, they're telling stories in a way people understand, right? It's talking about what impacts their daily life rather than having to be so highfalutin that an economist needs to understand your story. And if you can do that well, then you're going to get support for some of these bigger projects coming in because people will know how it benefits their life. And speaking of big projects, Hugh, take it away. Let's talk about Google.
Yeah, this announcement, the picture is our governor in the blue dress there in the middle, and a Google executive to her left, and local mayor and some legislators that sponsored a data center incentive bill. But this was announced last October. Very, very long negotiation, not necessarily with the state, but with the electric provider. And Entergy served. This is in West Memphis, Arkansas. Right across the river from Memphis, Tennessee. So, yeah, and I can't emphasize enough of, these data centers, power is their number one issue. So they will go to the local power provider and work out the details associated with serving their planned load. And, Google has not disclosed how many megawatts this will ultimately be required, but it's a big number. It's potentially probably Entergy's Arkansas's largest load. We'll see, but And I would say that the second bullet is clear cost causation principles instead of construction principles. That's kind of a regulatory term in the utility space where those customers who cause the costs to occur, they pay for those costs.
Mm-hmm.
And, the importance of the contractual negotiation that the utilities have and the discipline associated with that to ensure that number one, it's fair, but all the other customers are not saddled with, higher energy prices is really, really, really important. This was Entergy's first big data center announcement in the state of Arkansas. The Louisiana Entergy subsidiary landed Meta a year ago, and they landed AWS, all hyperscalers in Mississippi. So Entergy has found whatever combination it is to be able to land the hyperscalers, and at the same time, they got strong local support, worked together with the data center, the hyperscalers, to ensure that there was local support and state support to be able to serve them from a transmission perspective, generation perspective, and communicate to all the stakeholders of the benefits.
Yeah, and I know when you and I have spoken before, that was so important because I don't know if you have any more details to share here, but what really stood out to me was that the end user who's already receiving energy in that area was not going to have any negative effects from them coming in.
Yep, that's the goal. And the hyperscalers who have such enormous balance sheets, they're not your typical manufacturing industry that you negotiate these deals with. They require more power. They're still very, very tough negotiators, but they also pay more in cents per kilowatt hour than a steel mill, for example. I won't tell you how much more, but they do. And so they contribute more to those fixed costs than maybe a typical manufacturing industrial customer of a utility. Secondly, I think Joe mentioned this earlier, they write big checks to contribute upfront to some of the fixed costs in the hundreds of millions of dollars. They will, I think, in this deal, they'll fully fund, a 400 to 600 megawatt solar farm. Having a renewable portfolio was important to Google, and so Entergy and Google, with the approval of the regulator, the Arkansas Public Service Commission, ultimately got that deal done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely an exciting project for sure. Joe, you have some good examples of the community figuring this out in a creative way too with Geronimo Power.
Yeah, I could talk a little bit about this particular one coming to Minnesota. If they to cross all the T's and dot all the I's here, but this is the plan. And Geronimo Power has actually been operating in Minnesota for a while. They've produced a number of wind farms in Minnesota, so they know the energy space. That's what they do. And so they're into both wind and energy, and they've got like 2,800 megawatts of wind in their portfolio, or at least even under construction here. They've got a lot going on. But this project that they're looking at building is a 400 megawatt data center that will come online, they're saying, by 2030. And then the total project, if they do phase two as well, you'd have 1,000 megawatts total. And they're building the wind farms to supply that power. You can see that 1,400 plus megawatts there. One of the things they're doing is planning to have a closed loop system to help with the water concerns. And so they have been working locally. Their local power supplier would be Nobles Electric Cooperative. and out in this region. And so they got involved early on and talked to them and are working together on this project. And we won't go there yet, but there's the next slide will show you how the kind of the power supply contract is working. But the benefit to Nobles then, of course, is having this long-term revenue, right? If they get this data center comes to fruition, they've got that revenue coming in. And then these infrastructure upgrades that they get covered by Geronimo building this data center, they of course they receive those, but then also you're spreading out all the costs over all the fixed costs over more kilowatt hours. So these data centers can help to stabilize some rates if they're done right. And every contract's going to be different. Every deal, I think, is going to be different because of the complexity of every utility and every project going in. But in this particular project, they're talking about stabilizing those rates and spreading those fixed costs out. So it's going to be a real win for the local utility with costs covered by the data center that's coming in. So they're not putting this onto their members. Again, Nobles would be a not-for-profit electric cooperative. Any infrastructure built has got to be paid by somebody. They're not getting a return on their investment like investor-owned. So the members are paying for this in one way or another. The next slide here will show.
And I want to pause 1 second because what you said is so important. And when we talk about communicating with stakeholders, that is a key communication piece. I think for anyone listening, that's a really good idea. If you're getting pushback on bringing these larger projects in, but you know that your utilities needs infrastructure upgrades, Joe just told you what to say.
Yeah, sorry about that. And they have been working locally. Like I say, they know the area, they know the rural Minnesota because they built in that area, but they are working to address community needs and and questions. They're getting out there, holding public meetings often to get the communication flowing and to also listen to people. So they've been working it, and we'll see. I mean, this is the plan there that's moving forward so far. And then, on the power supply side of things, because so Nobles being the distribution cooperative there, you can see how they're supplying power to the data center down there. And their power supplier is Great River Energy. They have an all requirements contract with Great River Energy. So they cannot work directly with Geronimo to buy the power from them. And so Geronimo works a contract with Great River Energy to be the wholesaler, selling that power to them. And then Great River Energy, of course, is a MISO participant, and that's just a kind of a diagram of how they've figured this, factored this in so that it works for power supply contracts and that they have. And then Geronimo, this is just one of the slides from some of their information they put out. They're really, this would be a huge economic boom to the area. I mean, you're talking rural Minnesota out here. Almost $13 million in annual tax revenue would just be huge. You can see the different school districts of the county there, the capital infrastructure upgrades, the jobs that would be there, the full-time jobs, not to mention the construction jobs in building this out over multiple years. And they're planning to set up a charitable fund as well. So, I mean, they're really trying to be a good partner. This would be a huge boon to the area, and they're trying to communicate that, be in front of everybody on what's going on, be open and out there about it, So that's one of the challenges. I know you were seeing in the news some of the well, in Minnesota, they're talking about possibly getting rid of NDAs, so that these things have to be more public at communities and things. And I don't know if Hugh has anything to add on that, but just kind of how do you balance between you've got to work a deal, right? But how do you when do you bring the public in and let them know what's going on? That's a challenge.
Yeah, we haven't seen that specifically, although we have seen periodically certain public officials saying, "Hey, I want to be part of that negotiation," which typically we've not seen that before.
Which is interesting. Yes, these are all really good tips on that communication piece. Now, Hugh, I know this is a data center project in your area. If you don't mind, though, I want you to give more of that legislative perspective, and we're running out of time. Do you mind if I skip ahead to that?
Yep. The only
Right.
thing on that last slide, I would say, data center developers are different than hyperscalers, so you have to address there's different risks involved, and the utilities obviously see that. So,
All right, so let's talk about legislation because people that are watching, this may be an approach they could consider at their state if the legislation's not supporting their own energy growth.
yeah, and being an old utility executive, this was nothing. This was not rocket science. These concepts have been around a long time. Some states allow them. Most states probably don't. In the typical addition of major investments that a utility has to make. But basically, the legislation was the co-ops were at the table, the investor-owned utilities were at the table. They were working together. The state was also at the table negotiating the provisions of the statutory change, which basically modernized the regulatory framework to be able to that enabled the utilities to respond quicker and with more certainty to these very large load customers. We call them in the legislation strategic investments. And typically it was in the generation and transmission functions within the utility space. And effectively, it allows, it shrunk the regulatory time. I don't know if you want to go to the next slide, Bethany. It shrunk the regulatory approval time from the traditional model from about 18 months to probably closer to 6 months. But it allows the utilities to begin their cost recovery of that project when the regulator approves it and when they start spending money. Historically, they could only start recovering the money when the power plant or the transmission line actually went into service, called used and useful for the customers. So basically, this creates certainty, more certainty for both the customer as well as the utility. It also creates certainty for the regulator because they're involved. They get to see it. The utility still has to demonstrate the need and justify the costs, and there's routine updates. So without this legislation, I don't think the utility Entergy would have been able to land the Google project.
Yeah, so very important. And obviously, you say right here, earlier, yes or no for customers, right? You got to be able to respond quickly.
Yep. Yeah, and this is just your four stakeholders. For ratepayers, really, really important that you protect the existing ratepayers, and allowing the utilities to recover these costs sooner actually lowers the overall cost of the project compared to the traditional manner where you build a lot of interest up during construction. It's called the allowance for funds used during construction, another utility term, regulatory term, but ratepayers are protected. Regulators are still involved and have approval authority. The ultimate customer gets their decision, yes or no, quicker, and the utilities, it provides them more certainty.
Yeah, which that certainty is important when you're making massive investments.
Yep.
Now, I know that we're running out of time, so I do want to skip ahead real quick on the Minnesota perspective legislatively, because Minnesota's doing things very differently than Arkansas. I'm sure each state is.
Yeah, and I can cover this pretty quickly. We don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but we've got the 2040 carbon regulation, which is there's other states with it, one of the most stringent in the country to be carbon free by 2040 with some interim targets that ramp up there. And so utilities have that in their sights. When we're talking 2040, that's 14 years out, which literally is tomorrow for utilities. So that's what we've got here as far as regulations in utilities. You want to hit the next slide, which really just shows the need that's there. On the left side of this graph is the basically carbon-free sources that are there, about 50% so far. This is current, what the mix is made of, and then on the right side you have other resources, that are not carbon-free that need to go away by 2040. So that's a big ask, and there's technology that is not yet invented that probably has to be used in this, or as I'll talk about too, is we're looking to remove the nuclear moratorium as well. Has to be a factor in it because, and that's this slide here, that nuclear is such an amazing fuel, amazing resource. And that's why we're hearing it talked about right across the country. We're hearing kind of a resurgence in nuclear. I got a stat here, that 3.5 ounces of uranium equals 1.5 tons of coal. So you can produce so much power from it. And it's carbon free. So, and if you saw on that slide that the mix where half of it was carbon free on the left side of the graph, a good, what was it, about 40% of that carbon free was nuclear. So you're really talking wind and solar would have to ramp up so much. It's just not feasible, but that we've brought together a coalition of more than 60 in Minnesota, made up of utilities, government groups, environmental groups, labor unions, and different that have come on board and said, let's remove that moratorium here. And there is momentum. I don't know if it's going to happen this year, but we're going to need that in order to really meet the carbon-free goals in Minnesota.
Yeah, and I know for you, Willie, what you're talking about too is that you need to have multiple sources of energy. We did skip one of your slides, Hugh, but that's your approach too, right? At the state of Arkansas, you're really looking at multiple sources.
Yeah, I mean, you have to. And Joe, I really hope that you guys are successful, because from an economic development standpoint for the state of Minnesota, some of those goals by 2030 and 2040, they just cannot, they cannot be achieved or go out of business. And it's very unrealistic to be able to run an economy with an electric infrastructure that's designed that way.
Yeah. And in fact, somebody just recently, I heard him saying when we were talking about this, because we're talking 14 years, right? They're like, well, no power plant's going to get built. Yeah. But if our goal is 2040, I mean, it's not a loss if by 2045 we've got something up and running, or by we're heading in that direction. So let's keep heading there. Let's not throw up our hand and say, well, we can't get there by 2040. Forget it all. So I thought that was a good perspective on things.
And for economic developers listening, you could be a champion for your utilities too when they're looking at these different changes that are happening politically, that sometimes more time is needed.
Joe, I was just noticing the natural gas to zero by 2040. Is that just new natural gas, or do you have to shut down the old natural gas too?
Anything that produces any electricity produced by carbon has to be gone or not used. What will really happen now? There are off ramps built in the law that if reliability is going to take a hit or costs go through the roof, but that's kind of squishy yet. That's not real clear and cut. What are those off ramps? That's going to be up to the Public Utilities Commission in working with any particular utility. So what'll probably happen, right, is we will be doing carbon offsets or something like that. Is what would happen.
Mm.
Now, in all of these conversations, whether it's generating new or transitioning because of current legislation, I know I've spoken with both of you about the need to have people who can build it. Like you said, it might not be practical to get it built by 2040, maybe 2045 or 2050, but we need to have the workforce. And I'd love for you guys, because we don't have a ton of time left, just to share any insights on what you have seen being successful in training the workforce you need to expand your own grids in your state.
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick. I mean, we're really turning our workforce development strategy. We've turned it around upside down in the last 3 or 4 years, really focusing on these um, more work-based learning, apprenticeship programs, doubling down on our veterans workforce. We've made a lot of investments, strategic investments at our community college that are aligned with the regional industries around those community colleges, so that it's the industry sending the demand signals to the colleges on what you need to be training the students that I'm going to hire, as opposed to the other way around that it's been for many, many years.
Yeah, absolutely. And getting that outreach done is important. I know in the state of Minnesota, so I'm jumping around here, guys. Joe, I don't know if you've ever worked with them, but rural Minnesota SEP, they actually have a bus that's going around and reaching local kids. And I know in Ohio, they use it for adults too, where they can have these virtual experiences and introduce them to careers like
Oh,
energy.
yeah, that's cool. I've not heard of that. That's neat. I'm surprised I haven't heard of that.
Yeah. You got to be creative in reaching those workers, and we have a whole virtual reality production team at Golden Shovel, and we've created training videos actually for linemen safety as an example,
Mm,
which is really interesting because when you're trying to get people trained up, these virtual reality tools actually put you in the environment in a safe way, and it can kind of expedite some of the training that they need. But
yes.
again, that speaks to the need to have a team in place. It is something that requires everyone, including your workforce development partners, and making sure that they have training in place now to support the infrastructure development that's going to happen to meet everyone's goals, regardless of the state that you're in.
Mm.
Now we are at the end, and really, this is such an important topic. I'm sorry, guys, we didn't go through everything, but these slides will be available to everyone later. But I do want to give Joe and Hugh each the opportunity to say any closing thoughts that you think are really important for our audience before we go to Q&A.
Well, it's got to be an integrated, comprehensive review of all of the data to be able to make good decisions. You got to work together as a team, statewide, with all the necessary stakeholders at the table. These are hard problems, but they can be solved.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think along with that, right, seeing what is policy wise, what are the policies in your state, what are the players involved, not just utilities, but it certainly would apply to other players, economic development wise. What legislation is out there? What regulations are you trying to change? Participate, be on board, make your voice heard to help get legislation and policy and establish that will help economic development in your state.
Absolutely. You two have actually made a very clear case today of how there's very different things being done in different states. And so if you want policy that's going to make it easier for you, you need to be involved. Thank you so much for sharing your insights today, both of you. I appreciate it. Now, Nathan, I want to hand it over to you because I'm sure there's some questions.
Yes, we do have a few. First one, until recently, solar batteries and EVs were being actively promoted by federal subsidies. Is that a strategic way out of the divide between residential and industrial or data center power needs? And if residents can generate their own power, they potentially won't be as worried by the prospect of new data center, new industrial development. Is that a way to kind of create some security or some sense of security among residents that they're not going to be affected by these high power use developments?
I don't think so. I mean, it's kind of two different things. EVs are one thing. Data centers are completely different. I think we're still going to see, while the new administration has got a different policy toward the EV subsidies of the previous administration, we're still going to see the EV demand increase that's happening is just maybe a little flatter curve, upward to the right curves than we've seen in the past. The data centers, absent major national policy that slows things down. I noticed that in the paper there's a Senate proposal to put a moratorium on data centers. I don't think that will be successful in the Senate, but I think the world of AI and serving AI via data centers is here. I think the real interesting thing in the future will be how more efficient will the chips be in the future to use less power. There's probably just as much R&D going into that as there is new data centers as well.
And I'll just really quickly add, I think you're talking the scale is not really going to make enough difference to it. It's just the scale wise. You have 5,000 homes put solar panels on their house. If that's kind of what I gathered from the question, and it might help that person with their, feeling better about what they're doing. But the scale's just so large anyway that we find in Minnesota that what am I trying to say? Since we're going to be carbon free anyway, that was some of the argument too. Oh, well, we'll help you get there carbon free. Well, or we'll help generate green energy. Well, we have to be 100% carbon free. So that's the direction utilities are going. And to build utility scale solar is cheaper than having all the rooftops do it, put it on rooftops as well. So I think the scale is just going to be too large.
Sure. Next question. Might city land at a data center that would be built in an adjacent unincorporated area? This has caused a lot of anger in the unincorporated area and in the community in general. How can communities avoid this situation?
I'll chime in here. It does come back to proactively communicating with everyone as far as what you're doing as an economic development office and how the work is going to positively impact their life. We really drill this home with our clients because, again, what is impacting people day to day? It's what are they paying at the grocery store? What are they paying at the gas pump? What is their rent? Do they have childcare availability? What are the schools like? If they're a business, can they hire the talent that they need? So you have to find ways to take the projects that you're working on and transfer it into what they care about. Because if you're just sharing information about the data centers that are coming in and you haven't made that connection for them, there's no reason for them to support it. So you have to do that work initially. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean they've got to see the benefit to them for what's in it for me, ultimately, and and it may be more jobs in the community, a greater tax base. The data center is going to contribute to the public school system, or however the taxes are structured in that state. So I know the Google example in Arkansas, there was just tens of millions of dollars that were going to go to the local school district.
Well, Joe, you had a little graph too that even showed they were creating a nonprofit. So there's so many things that Geronimo, there's a little pie chart and they were creating a nonprofit.
Oh, for the dog, donating money to the area. Yeah, be involved in the community. Give some money back. Certainly.
Yeah.
This one's kind of along the same lines, and I think we addressed it a little bit earlier. Are panelists seeing data center operators committing to generating their own power or agreeing to prioritize residents' power needs over their own?
We've seen a lot of discussion about them bringing their own generation, their own power plants to support their particular needs. So there's been a lot of talk, but we haven't seen it yet. Certainly in Arkansas, but it's an option for them for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the example I gave is really Geronimo bringing that power supply to it, and of course they're in the business, so it works for them. But I think there's creative ways that they can data centers could be looking at doing something like that.
Next question. I'm hearing complaints about sites that are promoted as being shovel ready that are not. There is a build it and they will come mentality at work. Any advice on how I can convince my stakeholders to avoid this sort of reputational damage?
Hmm.
Joe, you want to go first on that? I can add to it.
Um, so the questions about or not basically promoting an area saying it's shovel ready and it's really not. Yeah, I don't know how you get ahead of that. You've got to trust is a huge factor in all kinds of business, right? Communication being one of them. And when you're doing business, you want trust. If you're promoting something that's not reality, it's not going to take very long for people to figure out they don't need to be doing business with you or the areas you say are. You just cannot. People have got to see they've got to change the communication on it. You've got to be upfront and honest on what the situation looks like. People will smell it.
Yeah, something we've done here in Arkansas, the legislature allocated $50 million to our economic development agency to administer over the next couple of years for site development. And we actually hired a consultant, a third party, and lined out rules for the program and had basically competitive bids for local communities to send in, hey, I've got a site, but if I could get a $500,000, for example, for an environmental study or, a minor road improvement or some grading, that was, we're about ready to announce the first $25 million. And you can, it then becomes the third party can become the bad guy in terms of telling the community you didn't win your $500,000 because it was not competitive. It didn't move the ball forward. You still have a site that's unattractive for the following reasons. Here's what you might want to do. There's various states across the country that are doing this, and this is kind of our first step in the water to dip in the water to do this. So we did a little bit a couple of years ago with $10 million. It was very successful, which allowed the legislature to grant us $50 million in the next couple of years.
And one thing all of those are really good pieces of advice. I will also add that I'm seeing a lot of economic developers change how the sites are labeled to being development ready, not shovel ready, because shovel ready comes with certification connotations. And then people can ask, well, what does development ready mean? And then you have the ability to say, like Hugh suggested, well, maybe I need this particular grading done, but by the way, the state's going to be putting in for that. It allows you to have a conversation versus looking like a bait and switch.
One of the big things, if you don't have the control of the site, that's a problem immediately.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
One last question. How much opposition are you seeing come from at the state level, if any? New York has given economic development organizations mixed signals on data centers.
Opposition for data centers, you mean?
Yeah, I believe so.
We haven't seen opposition at the legislature yet. There was a 2023 data center incentive passed. Data center incentive law passed. It was upgraded in 2025, tweaked a bit. We haven't seen it at the state level. However, every community is different, and there are some communities in Arkansas that don't want a data center in their backyard.
Yeah. And in Minnesota, it depends upon the community. Statewide, there was some legislation just passed that, they've got water conservation measures and they can't pass costs on for investor owns, they can't pass costs on to the public and things like that. So they did pass a law, but they did extend a sales tax exemption as well on equipment, computer servers, and software. So that's a plus for data centers coming in this way. So I think they kind of met in the middle on it in Minnesota. But as far as development, yes, you're seeing some communities push back more than others, and it depends on what the projects are and what the benefits are.
I think some of the conflict that we're seeing is that at the state level, there may be interest in bringing the data centers in, but then if you get enough of a groundswell from the local community in opposition, then their local elected officials need to be their voice, right? And so they're going to start having that opposition. And that's why, again, that proactive stakeholder engagement is so important. And it means including everyone in the community, not just the people that you normally engage with.
Yeah.
That's all the questions we have. So I will say thank you to all of our guests for being here. We had a wonderful conversation. Thank you to all the attendees. If you're interested in more on data centers, we have this white paper you're seeing on your screen. You can scan that QR code and download it for free. We will have the recording of this conversation available soon. And as Bethany said, we can make the slides available because we did not get a chance to touch on all of them because we had so many good things to say about the ones we did talk about.
Yeah. And again, thank you so much to both of you for participating. We appreciate your time.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks.
Thank you.